Hi everybody. Welcome to our assignment 5 feedback. This week you were tasked with a couple of different options to pick from in regards to compositional strategies. So before we get going here, I do want to just put it out there that as we get a little deeper into the class, we're going to push you a little bit harder. And so the comments might be a bit more poignant here. Please don't take anything I say here personally. This is all meant to help you refine and build your work. Remember, ultimately, our goal is to have a really strong final portfolio. So at this point, mistakes are okay. I want to emphasize that mistakes are okay as long as you are learning from them. So totally get when you make a mistake, fix it, change it for the next assignment, and that's great. But if you keep making the same mistake over and over and over again, it leads me to wonder whether A, you're not listening to the videos, or B, you're not reading the course or interacting with the course materials. So please stay engaged, and I'm certain that your work will be awesome by the end of the semester. So with that being said, let's start out with Timothy's work. So first of all, we look at Timothy's camera raw screen capture, which is good. This is exactly what I'm looking for. I like all the adjustments here. The one thing I'd be a little concerned about is you're moving pretty far into the clarity slider. And as you do that, things do tend to look almost over sharpened. I don't necessarily see that here in the shot, but with other shots, it can tend to look very unnatural, especially if you're working with people and skin tones. Here, it's kind of a still life, inanimate object, so I don't think it necessarily is a problem here. But again, if you were doing this with a people photograph, I'd be a little concerned about that. So your horizontal shot, it's good. It does look at just a teeny bit off kilter here. If we were to just go in and crop this, so what I might consider doing here is just leveling that out a little bit so it doesn't look quite so tilted there. It's not horrible, but I think we can kind of level it up so it's a little bit better straight across. But love this line of pawns here, and we have the one different colored chess piece and different shape of it that certainly our eye is almost immediately attracted to. So like that a lot. Same way in this image, I do think again you're kind of tilted a little bit to one side. So, we can correct this easily with this crop device. You kind of go in and, if you grab the corners, you can rotate that crop around. And then once you do that, you can kind of look to get it somewhat level here. But other than that, again, I like the image, very strong, very simple, lots of repeating patterns here. And, again, this visual repetition that's going on with all the dots here is certainly broken up by this one dice or die here that has the 5 dots on it. So that certainly works for me there. Sorry, let's get this crop window off of there. Another solid shot. I mean, I love that you're working with shapes and patterns and forms, and certainly that is a big part of composition and understanding that idea of visual rhythm in images. And I'm glad you're putting these on blank backgrounds. A lot of times students, especially if they're shooting these in their dorm rooms or whatever, have a lot of busyness behind them. In this instance, I think, our eye just goes right to these chips. So that definitely works for me. In the last shot here again, we've got the patterns of the blues and the one, the red one here, certainly is what our eye goes to. I do find it interesting, the placement of the thumb. I find the thumb actually to be a compelling part of this image, and I'm just wondering if you had moved the frame down just a teeny bit more here so we can just see a little bit more of that thumb. I think that might work even better, and I think maybe you just have a little too much extra space up here, so just bring that frame down a teeny bit. But all in all, good job here. You certainly understand pattern, rhythm, breaking patterns, and so forth. So keep an eye on that, and just watch out for the camera tilting on you a little bit. Sometimes tilts are okay, but when you have something like chess pieces that we see straight up and down, and a chessboard that's straight horizontal, more often than not, we want to typically get those level. So, good job here, and looks forward to seeing what you have for us next week. Okay, next up we have Hannah's work. And again, we've got that camera raw panel, which like what I see here. Again, with everybody, just caution, probably 25 might be the limit of where I'd want to push these sliders, unless I was really trying to sort of create a look that is really manipulated, or sometimes we use the terminology, a look that is really digital. It almost has an artificiality to it. But all in all, that looks pretty good to me. And so we've got a beautiful, nice, sweeping diagonal line here that leads up to the church. I love the empty space of the green grass here. I think that works really well. The one thing that I just might suggest here is we're cutting this tree off sort of at the top of the frame, and maybe we just tilt the camera up a little bit higher to get the entire tree in there. But other than that, really, really beautiful photograph, and I really love how the beautiful, graceful curve of this kind of really, really, highlights or emphasizes the sharp, triangle-shaped nature of this church here. So, really beautiful shot, very, very well organized, and I love how the frame is really simple and clean. And a diagonal line here, and yeah, definitely a diagonal line, even a triangle we've got going on. And I think the fact that we've got sort of almost like a dark room or dark bookshelf, and where we can even just see like only parts of titles, sort of adds to the anxiety that's happening here. That certainly is somewhat rooted in the use of diagonals in this photograph. And then our piano horizontal. Here's just a quick thing that this is not something I would expect you guys to know off the top of your heads, and it's not something we've really talked about too much. But you see, you've got a focal length of 19 millimeters, which is a wide angle lens. And when we get wide angle lenses, we kind of have to start to watch out for them doing what we call fish eyeing, which is basically our straight lines start to curve in there. And we can see this fisheye effect that's starting to happen here at the bottom of the keys. We do have a filter that can correct that. So if you go under filters, lens correction, and let me pull that in, you'll get this window here. Let me just make this a little bit smaller so we can see it. And once you get that, then we can go and make a custom correction. And so let's just zoom back or zoom up a little bit here. And in the custom correction, what we're looking at is the barreling. So remove distortion. So you can see if I push it farther to the what looks like a barrel, that's why I use the term barreling, the lines start to turn a little bit more circular or cylindrical, and then as I go to the other direction, they start to straighten out a little bit here. So, just a minor correction. The curvature of the lens isn't a huge big deal here, but I think it's just gives me an opportunity to show you guys that technique, because there may be some time that you want to use a wide angle lens, but it's kind of giving an artificial distortion to the photograph. So, but good shot here. Again, I like the horizontal nature of it. Your vantage point is pretty cool here. And it is interesting that though we do have some vertical lines going on here, and I think what those vertical lines do is they act to draw our eye into the sort of wood area of the piano, and my eye, I even find it going to the name up here. And then last but not least, the church vertical image. This is probably my favorite image of the group. I love the vantage point. I love the angle. My eye certainly pushes right through here up to the top of the thing, but then it kind of begins to almost work its way back down, and when it hits the bottom, it kind of goes back up there. So there's almost like this kind of figure eight thing going on in this image that really captures my attention, and in many ways has a certain abstract beauty to it. So really beautiful creative image, and I think definitely my favorite of the group, and certainly a strong image here, and something that, as we began to think about portfolios, this would definitely be an image that I would hold on to for your final or midterm portfolios. So good job with this. You are on the right track, and everything looks great. So look forward to seeing what you have for us next week. And next up we have Maurice's work. Again, here is our Camera Raw panel. The only thing I might suggest here is you might want to kind of play around with this white balance here. Your image seems to have a little bit of a yellow cast to it, which at times can work very well, and other times can seem a little odd. In this case, the deck of cards does seem kind of worn and old, so having that yellow cast might be appropriate. But for everybody, don't be afraid to play around with this white balance slider here. And in your images, if everything looks good and you don't have to work with these, that's also perfectly fine. So we've got a nice big sweeping curve here of this arch. Certainly one of the features of arches that makes them so appealing is that curved line that is inherent to all of them. As I said before to the previous, or maybe it was Timothy before that, you do just have a little bit of a tilt to the frame, and again, that's simply corrected with our crop tool and just turning the frame a little bit in the crop. So I like that. Beautifully simple image that definitely focuses in on not only the curve there, but also the beautiful pattern of crosses and the other architectural features in there. Turn off the crop there. And we've got a vertical line here, sort of this is all stacked up. I guess the one thing that I'd like to see is, again, this just seems like it's cut off oddly here. So maybe just, giving us another 1/4 of an inch of space that kind of gives us some breathing room between the edge of your frame and this really cool looking, I think this is a very interesting looking device at the bottom of the fire alarm there. And then back to your card. I really like the horizontal lines here, but I also like the idea of breaking the pattern where we've got all of these cards in a very symmetrical line up here, and then just the one card that's kind of peeking out of there, and that certainly calls my, or grabs my attention right away. You know, just as long as I've got it here, I'll just go into adjustments and go to color balance. And bring that in. And on our color balance, it's the image looks really yellow and reddish, so we can just correct that by working with our magentas and blues. So it kind of works. I think it cleans it up a little bit. There's before, there's after. After it kind of is a little bit more neutral. So, you know, again, probably more of a matter of aesthetic taste more so than anything. But the important thing here is that you recognize how to do that, and in a situation that you do want to change that color cast, that you go ahead and are able to do it. And last but not least, your diagonal lines here. And yeah, it almost feels like those cards are being shuffled because of the diagonal lines and because of the sort of active way that they trigger our brain to perceive motion in there. You know, it was interesting reading your reflection, how you talk about the world when we really start looking at it is just one big collection of lines. And I certainly would agree with you on that count. And really, the challenge you guys have as photographers is you just have to go in and bring order to all those lines, because our brain wants to follow lines when we see it. So the more you can do to bring order to any lines in your images is certainly going to be important to creating meaningful and images that are really going to stick with the viewer. So good job here, Maurice, and certainly look forward to what you have coming up next week. Thanks. So next up, we have Deodric's images, and here is, excuse me, here's his camera raw window. Again, we see a little bit of that yellow cast, which certainly could be adjusted by working with this white balance pull down menu. And when you do pull down that white balance, you'll see there's an option for tungsten light, which is a tungsten light is basically a regular household light bulb that tends to have this yellow cast to it. So with that pull down correction in there, that kind of would get rid of a little bit of that yellow cast in this image. But again, I almost like the yellow cast in here because it kind of gives it a feeling of sort of like a late night drunken, sort of foggy experience. So I'm all right with the way the white balance is in this image. So it looks like you were working through the rule of thirds with these different images. I think the one thing that makes me want to do with all of these is just maybe pull in a little bit tighter. And if you notice on my crop here, I actually have these rule of thirds that kind of pop up here. So, as we play around a little bit, we can kind of see the different effects. And I'm almost wondering if we get in really close there, whether now we sort of have these two spots in the rule of thirds. I mean, they're not perfectly in there, but I think that might be the way to go with this type of image, especially when we have two objects in there that add sort of like a degree of sophistication to the crops on the images. Same way we kind of take that through. Again, I think you're just giving us just a teeny bit too much stuff in the background, which, again, simplify things, which I think for the most part you're doing here, but, again, maybe that works. This is probably my favorite of the group as you presented them. And again, you're not perfectly in the rule of thirds spot. We're looking for these areas of intersection here, not actually the box, but the area of intersection. So, this one for sure I'm not super crazy about. But maybe this one or that first one I looked at, I think certainly work. But when this resonates the most for me, any of these is really when you take it up one notch and you've actually got these two bottles, not just the one in these rule of thirds areas. Something like that. I know we've got a little extra crop there. So good job, and I love the fact that you spent some time working around that and trying to work through that problem, and just getting a better understanding how placement within the frame strengthens it or weakens it depending on where you put it. Just one thing I want to point out real quick. It looks like you submitted these as PSDs, which again are Photoshop documents. Just it's an easy mistake to do when you do your save as. If you make sure that you pull this down to JPEG rather than leaving it as Photoshop. That way you'll save it as a JPEG, not a Photoshop. So just keep that in mind. And the reason we really want to do that, these are giant files here. I think these were like 20 megabyte files, and it really does take a long time for me to download the whole class's sets of images. So if you can, please avoid uploading those as Photoshop documents for me. So good job, and we'll see you in the next feedback video. So next up we have Matthew's images, and he's working with the various positions of the subject within the frame. I think I love this one simply because the symmetry in here is so wonderful. The left half and the right half of the photograph almost mirror each other exactly, which it's not an easy thing to do to get it that perfectly lined up. So kudos to you on this for sure. Then a shot of him at the bottom. I think I don't like this one as much simply because Peter Canisius again is kind of starting to blend into that background, whereas the other image here, it felt like there was a little bit of separation between him and the background. Maybe it's just the context of having more area behind him and more detail and information, so it doesn't look like it blends in as much as it does here. Or maybe just you're a teeny bit closer here, and that's kind of why you get that perception there. And then just looking at your Photoshop RAW screen grab, this is good. Again, everybody just caution you a little bit on going too far on these things. With landscape photography, you can probably get away with it a little bit more so than you would with people photography. So, just be wary anytime when we make a correction. Probably, about 25, 30 units, either plus or minus, on any one of these sliders is probably the point where things are going to start to look somewhat artificial here. And the image off to the left a little bit, I kind of like this one also. I just almost wonder if we had a person walking here. It looks like maybe there's somebody up on the stairway there, but they're just not distinct enough for us to see it. But I like what you're doing here. Definitely like this, and I think this certainly resonates also. And then this looks like again another image in the center, a little bit farther back, where we get a little bit more of the base for the monument or the sculpture. It's not quite as perfectly straight up and down. It's tilting just a little teeny bit to the left here, and I think that is why I might prefer that first image that we looked at here. But nonetheless, good job, and again, I think you're working with things in a manner that I'm expecting out of everyone right now, and your adjustments and exposure here look great. So good job with this assignment. And next up we have D'Angelo's work, and in his Camera Raw, these look really good. Again, as I pointed out on the other ones, we can kind of correct some of that yellow if we pull out or pull down this white balance menu item right there. That will have a tungsten light correction in there, and that'll get rid of a little bit of that yellow cast. But that being said, and what I've said before, a lot of times that yellow cast actually can work to enhance the aesthetic value of an image. So certainly we don't always have to have something perfectly corrected. And in fact, slight shifts in color correction can definitely be used to your advantage. And then we just start seeing where you're kind of positioning the subject in different spots in the photograph. We've got it, that painting in the center, in the left, in the lower right, and again in the left. I'm sorry, that's in the upper left here. So of all of these images, I think the one that I'm sort of drawn to from just a creative aspect is this one. I think it's a little different in that our eye is sort of taken along these the window treatments, and the back of the couch here sort of draw my eye through the photograph, and they ultimately land on this colorful painting there. That being said, I think this image is a teeny bit on the dark side. So if we were to lighten this image up a little bit, I think that probably we would see this image be a little bit more impactful. Now that it's as bright as some of those other ones there, I think that this image really works for me. Nothing wrong with any of these. I think all of these certainly work, and I think definitely these were all worthy experimentations, and really that's what I'm looking for out of this. I just want you to give thoughtful consideration to where you're placing things within the frame and how the different positioning of objects is going to affect the way the viewer perceives this. So great job here, like what you're doing, and keep up the good work. So next up we have Sydney's work here, and of course her first image with the Photoshop Camera Raw panel in there. Again, good adjustments here. You're not taking any of them to any kind of extreme areas here, so it's going to keep sort of a naturalistic look to all of your images. And then you're working through lines here. Yeah, I love this big, beautiful, sweeping curve that we've got going on in this image. Let me just move these panels out of the way. And, it starts, and you think about it, we read books from left to right. So, this nice line starts on the left-hand side of the frame. And just like our eye is trained to work through, we work across from the left to the right. And then our eye is kind of pulled back to the left and then drawn all the way through the end of this photograph. So beautiful image. I guess, the one thing that we might add here or think about adding is a car or a motorcycle or a bicyclist or something at the end of this road or at the end of this big sweeping line that our eye kind of goes to and lands on. So I just feel like that's maybe the one element that we could add to this photo that might strengthen it a little bit further, but nonetheless, really beautiful shot. And then a vertical line, and love the texture here. We talk about texture in our previous assignment, and certainly texture here is definitely an important part of this photograph. So definitely the vertical organization of this frame sort of mirrors the vertical nature of trees itself. So I think, again, that's pretty successful. I've always seen this stand, and I've always wanted to take a picture of it. And now that I see your photograph here, I just see that it's still very photo worthy. So beautiful shot. Love, love, love the lighting that you've chosen to shoot this in. Looks like you've got late afternoon, early evening, setting sun. I love that we've got the patrons sort of waiting here symmetrically side by side, and even this little beam of light falling on the attendant or the waiters or whatever we call them at the stand. All really, really beautiful. And it's got this nice horizontal line which sort of reinforces the very tranquil, sort of like peaceful dusk kind of setting that you've established here. So beautiful job with that. And then our diagonal lines, yeah, again, we think about the exercises that they're doing here. They're very aggressive, particularly the stances that they're in, and those diagonal lines, and especially the diagonal lines, again, we talk about from the left to the right, are very easy for the eye to follow. I guess, again, the only thing that I'd think about doing here is you kind of cut her off right at the ankle, and it seems like almost an uncomfortable crop there. So maybe we include just another 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch in this frame so her foot isn't cut off quite so awkwardly. But again, nevertheless, really, really outstanding work here this week, Sydney. And just want to encourage you to keep working hard and keep doing the same thing, because you are definitely on the right path here. And so to wrap things up here today, we are going to finish up with Victoria's work. So again, Victoria, just before I forget, just make sure that, again, you upload as JPEGs, not PSD documents here. So looking at the image, wow, what a beautiful shot. This image is kind of mysterious in that, it almost makes me wonder, is it a shadow or is it a silhouette? What is it? And there's sort of a simplicity to it, but also a little bit of mystery to it that I guess relates to kind of the darkness of it. So really neat shot, and definitely very abstract, and certainly we've got these very visible vertical lines in there. Although, I'm almost wondering if we want to, really just cut off this frame here like this, make it a square image. That for me is pretty cool, and especially all the negative space up there. And there is your camera raw adjustments. Those look pretty reasonable and good to me. Our diagonal lines, which, yeah, these lines sort of pull us right into the frame here. The one thing is, when you get in real close to stuff, your depth of field becomes very shallow. So our eye sort of gets attracted to this sort of Q2WAS area and sometimes gets locked up in there. So just be careful, especially when you're shooting things very close. Recognize that you're only going to have a very small depth of field. And circular composition looks nice, although your image maybe is a teeny bit out of focus here. Looks like this might be kind of a slow shutter setting. Let's investigate here. And I don't see any camera info here, so no insight there. But I'm willing to bet that maybe just a teeny little bit of camera shake is going on here, particularly given that it looks like this was kind of taken at dusk, and the likelihood of it being a slower shutter setting is probably pretty good there. So just keep an eye on that, and in situations like this, if you do have low light that you have to shoot with slow shutter settings, bring yourself a tripod, or if you don't have a tripod, find something like a stone or a brick, or even just put it right on the pavement so that the camera is stabilized in the image. And then the last shot here, pretty neat shot, although we're starting to get a lot of this sort of awkward grainy pixelization here. I suspect that you may have overcorrected this in Camera Raw, because it does have sort of that really digital look that I had mentioned to a couple people in here. But that being said, I really love the repetition of the blues in this photograph, and even sort of all the different very interesting shapes of all the different signs here. So super successful image, really like it a lot. Just be careful on those adjustments, because this image is definitely starting to get some funky thing going on in the sky here. So that is going to do it for everybody this week. Really happy with the submissions here. I think everybody did a really wonderful job on this assignment. I'm starting to see some really good creative images out of everybody. So keep pushing yourselves to make better stuff. Don't settle for ordinary shots. Put the time in, and in the end, you're going to be rewarded with some wonderful imagery and art to call your own. So look forward to checking in with everybody next week. And of course, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out and connect with me. So have a good weekend.